Good morning, everybody. This is Brent Jeffries of bierermeters, Vice President of Field Operations, and we're coming again with our 003 Lineman Safety National Webinar. And so these are going to be available. And we've got Mr. Lito Wilkins. He's going to be speaking he's the Senior Safety Manager with International Linebuilders. I met Mr. Lito back in October of last year at the Incident Prevention Show, the Incident Prevention, what do you call that, Lito? Conference. That's right, call it a conference. I met him, talked with him, told him what we were thinking about getting together, thinking about starting and doing as a team, and he was all in it, all for it. So he's here today in South Carolina. We're at our live line training center here in South Carolina. We got some overhead, we got some underground, as you can see, and it's a great place to launch what we're doing, launch this movement from throughout the United States. We are booked up with speakers for the next year already, monthly. We've got Lito Wilkins today. Mr. Billy Martin is going to be coming in next month on the 12th of May, 9 a.m. Well, actually, we're going to change it to 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time due to plane situations. And then we got Jimmy Vaughn coming in August. We've got some folks all throughout the year, the best of the best trainers within the United States. So this is going to be a neat deal. Electric Culture of Safety, ECOS. Get on board. We're looking for some more logos, more participants, and it's pretty neat. We've been doing this for 2 months now, and it's catching on. So I hope you guys enjoy. Mr. Lito, come on in, man.
All right. Why is this happening? It hurts. Am I going to die today? These are thoughts that flash through my mind as induction from two 500,000 volt circuits surged through my body for roughly 30 seconds. The day that we planned on just doing our daily work, bare hand project. We've done it 100 times before this. Never thought twice about how the day would go, and this day was different and could have been bad. So I'm going to share my story today with you guys because I think everybody needs to hear something like this because it was an awakening for me. I had some hidden, I just call them deficiencies in my personal safety culture that were not apparent. And at the time, I was the safety lead on my crew. I had been involved in safety for a long time, and I guess I felt a little safe and protected because of that. So that day, we were going out to just do a normal project that we do 2 or 3 times a week, bare hand on 500,000 volts, and just started like any normal day. Woke up, got ready for work. I have a half-hour drive to the job site or to the yard, and this particular structure that we were going to that day was a 3-hour drive away. That day I had the insulator truck. So basically it's a flatbed tow truck style truck that we lay all the insulators on, and we can hose them off there so they're nice and clean before we get to the job site rather than wiping bells for an hour when we get there. And it's a slower truck than the others. So when I arrived at the job site that day, I was probably about 45 minutes behind the crew. So when I arrived, they were already set up, tools out, not waiting for me, but waiting for our permission to go on the energized circuit and do our work. And I'm not sure, I know I'm talking to a lot of linemen out there. I don't know how many have done bare hand work, are familiar with it. I know for me, when I was an apprentice and I got to do a little bit of helicopter work, the bug bit me. and I wanted to go work in transmission, where all the helicopter work was, at the utility I was at. And yeah, I fell in love with it. And then when I got to a transmission crew, probably 2 years after I topped out, we started doing bare hand work, and it's just, you know, added on to my love and passion for the work that we do. So bare hand work essentially is not bare hand, but it's bare hand work. You got a suit on, you got gloves on that are over your suit. The suit is Nomax and steel fibers, so it's a conductive suit. Boots are conductive, and you wear a hood over your head. Everything's tied together, so you're basically, when you get set on that conductor, you're energized. And I'll show a quick video of somewhat of what we were doing that day. Same style structure that we were working on. But this is the structure style structure we were working on. The plan for that day was to fly out to the job site. We had a crew of 4 of us. We're gonna have one guy on the energized side, gets picked up by the helicopter, set on the conductor here, and then it's 289,000 volts between your legs. And unhook from the helicopter, slide into position, start receiving all your material so you can put some slack in your insulators. And then the helicopter will come in, snatch the old insulators out of there for you, and then come back with some new insulators. While their insulators are coming in and out, we're replacing all the hardware, and basically just resetting the tower, new insulators and hardware. So this was the plan for the day. We had 2 structures that we were doing that day. So we had that 3-hour drive, 2 structures to do, which is a good day's work, with 100% fall protection. You know, before 100% fall protection came out, we could get a good 3 structures in, just due to how easy it was for us to climb around, you know, like monkeys on a jungle gym, just bouncing all over the place. You know, it's a little slower when you have to actually belt off and stay protected from a fall the entire time. So when I got to the job site that day, I got out of the truck, and I'm one that, you know, the helicopters, I love them. I've always been into aviation, so my thought when we get out to a job site is, you know, who's flown out to the job site? Is it something that I can do? If nobody's flown from the LZ, which is never right next to the tower or the structures we're working on, that's what I want to do. And the thought came to me when I got to the job site, but the crew had been set up for a while and waiting. So I immediately just passed that thought on, thinking that the crew had already flown out to the job site and looked at the structure to look for and identify any unforeseen hazards outside of the realm that we are usually working with. So I just went on with my business, got the insulators unstrapped, and got my harness and my suit and all that stuff inspected and put on. And then we had a crew tailboard. So this day was supposed to be like any other day, but when we got out there, we were informed. So anytime we do bare hand work, a supervisor has to be on site. Supervisor was there, and we found out that that night a lightning storm came through and toasted another structure worth of insulators. And so here we are, we have 2 structures, and then we have another structure worth of insulators to replace. So now we got a completely full day. There was 5 of us that were planning to go out on the structures that day and do some work. I was not planning on going on the conductor that day. I was going to be a cold-in employee and a rescue man. And so us needing another tower worth of insulators, we needed to send somebody back to the yard to pick up more insulators. So that left us with a 4-man crew with the supervisor on site, and then our foreman was running the LZ, flying all of our tools material out to us. And so when we had our tailboard, we talked about, you know, all the important things, you know, everything inspected. Here's the plan for the day. We got a lot of work to do. Let's be mindful of that and not get ahead of ourselves. And so once our tailboard was done, pilots were there, fired up the helicopter, and flew my two brothers. Now, just so you guys can understand the dynamic of my crew, the 4 linemen that were there, myself and the other 3 linemen that were there that day, we came up as apprentices. We worked together years, and we had already been together as a transmission crew. We'd been working together for, I would say, at least 3 years to that point. So a strong brotherhood there. We had a bond with each other. We knew each other's families, you know, and there was a lot of trust within that group. And so we get started, and I'm just going to use first names, but we had Mike and Carl flew out first. And the plan was to fly everybody out to the tower, spread across the tower so that when the helicopter changes hooks, starts flying material, we can just get the whole tower set up with material at each location and then start on one side and work our way across as a team. And my plan was I was going to land on the bridge of the tower and head out to the east arm and receive the material for that side, and then head over to the west side of the tower, and we were going to work that insulator and come across the V-string and then onto the east side. So Carl and Mike head to the tower. They come back for Tyler and me. We hook up and we're heading out, and we're flying to this tower. Excuse me. Flying to this tower, and this tower right away looks different than anyone that I've ever worked on. And as we're flying to it, this new hazard that we see as we're flying to it is right where the pilot is wanting to set us down. And so as we're flying in, we see this vertical run of OPGW, fiber optic right here. And the pilot is, actually we're on the other side flying in. He's wanting to set us right there where that vertical run is. And so, you know, we're like flagging him, you know, hey, and pointing to where we want him to set us. He ends up setting us over on the center of the bridge where we belt off, helicopter leaves, and we take like a 2-minute pause is what we call it, to discuss this new found hazard. You know, something that if somebody would have flown out to the job site prior to our tailboard would have seen. And obviously we had worked with OPGW before, but never in a vertical configuration. It's always been straight run through on the goat peaks, where it was, you know, attached to the tower and bonded to the steel and then ran to the next tower. This one you can see is stood off on insulators. Here, you can see it stood off on insulators, and as we looked at it, there was no bond going to the steel. So it was completely separate from the steel that we were standing on. And anytime we've worked with OPGW, we know we need to throw a ground on there to protect ourselves. And so as we looked at it, we traced it down. We looked down at the splice cam, which was about 50 feet below the bridge where we were standing. You could see the fiber go down below it and come into the, go below the can, and then come back up the other face, this face here, and then head back out. And it was insulated and stood off of the tower the entire way. And so we were thinking, okay, well, one ground should be sufficient to tie the entire thing together. And so we called for a ground. And our LZ lead was our foreman, and so, you know, he's caught off guard because he doesn't see what we're dealing with, and we're doing bare hand work, which is energized work. You don't use grounds in energized work, obviously. And so that threw flags up for him, and he's asking, you know, over the radio, well, why are we asking for grounds? What's going on out there that you need a ground? And so we had to describe to him what we have here, where there's a vertical run of OPGW that we need a ground so we can get past it, because my goal is to get out here to the other side of that. So I have to go past the hazard. So we do definitely need to protect it. So he sends us a ground, we get it hooked up, and where I end up placing it, I wanted it to be out of the way. I end up placing it down here at foot level, so we could just basically, if we needed to go on this side of it, we could just step over and past it It's out of the way. The cord's not anywhere where we can trip on it as we're going by. After we ground it, we take another 2-minute pause. And I feel I took that pause because I wanted to ensure that we were good. I would say that there were some questions, and not only my mind, but the mind of my brothers out in the on that tower that day. And as we looked around and traced it again, saw that we had the ground on, followed it out, we were good, and we all agreed. And like I said, we'd been working together for a long time. There was a lot of trust built up on that crew, and I trust my brothers to watch out for me. And so we elected to just move on and go with what we had planned for that day. So at that time, I decided, okay, it's time for me to head over to my job site, my work location on that tower, to start really receiving material which the helicopter was already bringing to us. And so as I went by, and the only thing as I think about that day, that the only reason I can think that I had gone on the other side, was that I'm right-handed. We are creatures of habit, and I always lead with my right hand as I'm climbing. And so my plan was to go on that other side of the tower, climb past it. And this accident happened in 2015, shortly after 100% fall protection came out for tower work. And so what I did that day is what I had been doing for years, climbing on steel. I am belted from the tower, not protected, and went to climb past that OPGW. When I got to that OPGW, there were still questions in my mind, and so I reached out and I did a little tap on that conductor, and I didn't get anything, and that just solidified in me that we were good. It helped me understand and feel better about what I had doubts about. And so as I went by, I was climbing past, and I'll show this one here. This is where I was climbing. I had to climb past it and climb out here. I had my left hand was here on the steel, right there. Left foot here, right foot here, and my left hand was my wrist was resting up against the OPGW right there, and nothing was happening. And so made me feel even better about what was going on, and about how we protected ourselves that day. The second I put my right hand on the steel right here to grab on and pull myself past, my body locked up, and it hurt. And I could hear it. I could hear the buzzing, like I would hear if I was going to get set on the conductor. And as soon as it came on, it went away, and then it came back again. And what was happening was the induction that was sitting on that OPGW was getting bled out through me into the tower, and then coming right back on. And it was pretty quick. And I would have to say at least 5 or 6 times I bled the induction off. So I went through the series of induction buildup, bleed off, induction buildup, bleed off. And my brother Tyler, who's 3 feet away from me, said I was lurching. I had a lurching sound coming out of me. And so as I'm sitting here clinging to this tower, questioning, why is this happening? What do I do? How do I get out of here? Because had I been fall protected, I could have just let go and fallen into my harness and been hanging here free and been away. But because I didn't have any fall protection on and I'm sitting 150 feet in the air, I'm stuck to what is hurting me and I can't get away. So after bleeding it off, going through this series of 5 or 6 times doing this, going through this, I was able to pull myself free with my left hand and fall backwards into the tower, back into this little area here, and landed on my back on a X brace there. When I landed on my back, my arms were constricted like this, and my legs were doing the same thing. and I was sore and I was in pain. But I immediately just like bypassed that feeling, those thoughts, because I was embarrassed. I was in shock, and I didn't want to be the one to shut the job down that day. I didn't want to be the one that day that had the accident. I was just in disbelief that this was even happening, and so my first thoughts, and I think the first words I even said was, "I'm fine, just give me a second." Not thinking about what I just went through, not thinking about what could be still going on with my body. And I told Tyler, who was standing there right next to me, who was now on the other side of the hazard. So my rescue was basically blocked out by the hazard that was between us. I just said, "Hey, I'm just give me a second, but stay away from that. Just stay over there. Just give me a second." Not thinking about what was going on in my body. Not even, just wanting to continue on with the day and get going, because I didn't want to be the guy that shut the day down. They reminded me, "Hey, this is not something small. This is something big. We need to get you to the hospital and get your heart looked at." And I didn't even think about those. And then that to me really made me realize how big of a deal this was. I called back to the foreman and said, I remember hearing on the radio, "Lito got bit, Lito got bit." Foreman's yelling back on the radio, "What are you talking about? Lito got bit. What's going on out there?" Because he can't see what we're doing out on the structure. Helicopter's already on his way over. He's near the structure with material. He had to turn around and go back and change lines to a human load line. Came back, picked up my brother Carl. Carl came back around over here and hooked me up and pulled me out of the tower, and they were flying me back. Still in disbelief that any of this was happening. I was still in the mindset of, let's get back to the LZ, recoup, just like reset, and let's continue on. And got to the LZ. They dropped me on, put me on the deck, and I could barely walk 5 feet to sit on the tailgate of the truck. My legs were so burnt, and not burnt, but just hurt from the muscle constricting. Sat down, and my foreman's like freaking out, like what happened. He's not understanding exactly what happened, and he convinced me that we need to get you to the hospital. You need to get looked at. Now, where we were working was probably about an hour and a half drive from a good hospital, from town, a good hospital, and about 30 minutes the other direction was like, I call it the Band-Aid station. It's just a little hillbilly country doctor. And we had an emergency action plan that day, which we put together. And usually, it's like, if somebody gets hurt, we'll assess the severity of their injury, and go from there. When we're way out in the middle of nowhere, primary evac is going to be a helicopter. So my supervisor's now informed of what's going on, because he's been on the phone trying to coordinate the extension of our work that day due to the lightning storm that fried that other tower. And I get on the tailgate of that truck, and I'm sitting there with my foreman, and he's proceeding to take me out of my suit and get me ready to go to the hospital. So he takes my boot off, and that's when the smell hits the air. It's a burnt smell, something burning. And he's like, "Do you smell that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I smell that." And he looks at the bottom of my foot. And what he sees at the bottom of my foot is this right here. I got burn holes in my sock. And he tears my sock off, and then you see a little exit wound, exit burn mark, where this is where that on the conductive boot, there's a little lug in the sole of the boot that bonds the sole to your sock. That's where your conductive sock touches the boot, and that's where all of that was going. So essentially what happened was my connection to that OPGW at my left wrist went down through my body and across and through my right foot and out my right heel. And instantly, as I processed this and it registered, and hit me, I realized that this is like full-on serious. You know, who knows where I'm at right now as far as making it through the day, because we don't know the condition of what's going on inside my body. The adrenaline was pumping. I was in shock, so I really couldn't assess myself where I was. So at that point, supervisors like, you know, need to get you to the hospital right away, and we elected for my supervisor to drive me to the hospital. And so we get in his pickup truck and we drive toward the town where the good hospital is. And now, hindsight, we're at a point right now where we have cell service. We have a running helicopter. All of my crewmates were off the tower now, back with me in the LZ. And we elected to take a pickup truck out of cell service toward the hospital. And so as I think about that and how dangerous that choice that we made was, you know, I could have gone into cardiac arrest on the way where it was just my boss and I, and there's no cell service, and he's stuck with just driving as fast as he can to get me somewhere versus putting me in the helicopter and flying me there. And I'll talk a little later about emergency action plan, because my incident and several other incidents that I've investigated since my accident, emergency action plans are not sufficient. And this day, I got lucky that things were good. I got to the hospital, went into the ER, they hooked me up, everything was checking fine. The doctor, after a couple hours, was wanting to just send me home. And they had never seen that magnitude of shock. And so my wife, who my boss stopped when we got back into cell service and said, "You're calling your wife. I don't want to make that call. You're calling your wife." And, you know, it's one of those phone calls where, you know, your spouse picks up the phone and hears you say, "It's me. Don't worry, I'm okay." Try to explain that to your wife when she's, you know, she understands the work that you do and how dangerous it is, and she's been to funerals with you, for brothers who have passed before you. We've all lost somebody. So by the time I get to the hospital, about an hour after I'm there, she shows up, and my wife's an RN, so she's pretty savvy with medical stuff. And so when the doctor wants to let me go home, she's like, "Are you sure?" Because, you know, he took a pretty good hit with this induction. And that's when the doctor came back about 20 minutes after saying she wanted to let me go, and said she did a Google search. And that just sounded weird to me that she did a Google search. But that Google search prompted her to look into, call some specialists about that magnitude of electrical shock. And I needed to be monitored for 28 to 48 hours. And what they're looking for is doing blood tests every 4 hours to see if my kidneys are receiving and filtering dying cells, dying organs or whatever. And so it was going to be a stay at the hospital for me that night. We get me to a room, and I'm there with my supervisor, still trying to figure out what went wrong, because like I said, we thought we were protected. That one ground, we traced it out and followed it. Here's my glove. You can see where my arm was touching. So that got a little spicy there. And then you can go back afterward. I got some pictures when I went back to the tower to finish this job. You could see the actual slag there on the steel where it was arcing across my glove. Got pretty hot. But as I sat there and talked to my boss about what was going on, after I had left with him to go to the hospital, my foreman hiked out to that structure and was down there and took some pictures of that splice can. And what we saw was a a no-brainer afterward when we thought about it. We're like, well, yeah, really. But here you see, this is the side that I grounded. It comes around right here, and you got a pot head right here. And what you see here is you got your lightning arrestor here, and your shielding, the conductive part of that OPGW, stops right here. It doesn't go into the splice can. Just the fiber optic goes in the splice can, comes back out, and then your shielding starts again. So this one was grounded. The one I went past wasn't grounded, and so it was still, it still had induced voltage from both 500,000 volt circuits, and that's what I took. And so it was eye-opening for me to learn that. But what really was eye-opening, as I sat there, my wife was there. She brought our youngest with me, or with her. She was 7 months at the time, and sitting there with her, and it really hadn't hit me. Even with my wife there, and realizing how close this could have been, it really hadn't hit me. Having to call my oldest, who was, she was 7 at the time, and explain to her as she was crying why Daddy was in the hospital and she didn't understand what happened, was a pretty hard conversation to have, and something definitely I had never really thought about having to do, because, you know, I till that day had thought, you know, I'm a safe worker, and I, you know, I'm the safety lead on my crew because I care about safety, and I care about my brothers, and I want them to work safe. And, you know, the funny thing about that day was I had just spent a whole day receiving all of our 100% fall protection gear, inspecting it all because I'm the competent person for fall protection on our crew, and issuing it that morning out to our crews so that we can go and do our job and be 100% protected, compliant, all that. And I wasn't protected myself that day. That night, my boss put my wife up in a hotel across the street. So I was in the hotel room, or in the hospital room, by myself. And I got woke up every 4 hours to do a blood draw, and they had to do they couldn't do it from an IV. It had to be like a new site every time they did a blood draw. And as I was awakened around midnight or so by the nurse, it all hit me. And I just sat there and sobbed. I was by myself in that hotel room, and finally realized how close it was for me that day to not be there anymore, to not be there for my wife, who would have to raise my 4 kids on her own, to not be there for my kids. And I completely understand what that would feel like. I lost my dad when I was 2 years old. And so it hit me hard. And even more so as I thought, and I sat there and talked to the nurse who was there for me about how I was feeling. I was recalling earlier that day when my crewmates walked into that hospital room and saw me laying in that bed, and how they looked different, and I could see how it affected them. I had never seen them in that state before, and it really weighed on me. And so many feelings and so many thoughts came into my mind as I laid there that night. It's one thing for me to make a mistake that would put me in the grave. But if I had made a choice that day and made a mistake that killed one of my brothers on that steel, I would have to live with that for the rest of my life. To go to the funeral and see their families suffering. And it really hit me. And this was my wake-up call. This really, it really affected me. It really made me think about the work that I do and how I've worked so far, and my commitment to safety. I had been the safety guy on my crew for a long time. I told you guys that. Before I became a lineman, I was in the Marine Corps right out of high school. Safety is taught from boot camp all the way through, and I was in aviation in the Marine Corps, and so my final job there, my 7th year in the Marine Corps, was I spent a year as a quality assurance safety observer on an aircraft carrier, and my job was safety, you know. And I sat and I would teach classes like I do now to 300 Marines about certain safety topics, and you know, to roll from that into this and have that safety mindset, I think I felt like I was protected, you know. And as I think about what's most important to me, it's these 5 people here, and how this right here almost wasn't. That picture, those pictures were taken after my accident, and that could have not been, you know. And all these trips to Disneyland and all these trips to the beach, and you know, coaching soccer teams, and all these things would have been lost, you know. And as I started to recuperate from this, I was out for 2 weeks, and the only injury that I have to show for my incident was I had a nerve in my back and my spine. Just a nerve was bothering me, and that was basically why I was off for 2 weeks. Is I just had major back pain. So very fortunate. I got through this pretty lucky, because we've seen what induction can do. I mean, plenty of men have died from induction. Plenty of men are living with you know, a missing limb or burns due to an induction incident. And as I started looking into induction and falls and injuries, and I started my path down this safety leadership trail that I was taking, I found out in 2015 that 602 people in 2015, the year that I had my accident, 602 people went to work and didn't come home. You know, and as we look, 364 fatalities from falls, which could have been me. I could have been added to that. The other one here, obviously, was the electrocution. 81 people died from electrocution in 2015. You know, and as I think about these stats, and you know, I looked at the other day, in 2021, 26 people in our trade died. So we're still seeing every year this number is not going down. It's not going away, and something has to happen, and that's why I'm here today to share this with you guys. I am blessed to be here today, and to be able to share my story. And there are plenty of people that didn't have the opportunity to change, to reassess their lives, to do better, or to help other people. So as I looked into what went wrong that day, obviously you guys probably picked out a few things, right? I made an assumption when I got to the job site. That was the first one. Assumptions. Made an assumption that somebody flew out to that job site and looked for the hazards, and I just went with that. I trusted it, and I was totally fine with it. And had I at least said something in the tailboard, spoke up and asked, hey, you know, did anybody fly to that job site? We do it all the time. That's something that we don't bypass. You know, we always fly somebody to the job site to look at hazards. And it didn't happen that day. We would have seen that vertical run of OPGW, sat as a crew before our tailboard and opened our grounding manual. And if you look in the utilities grounding manual, at that time, OPGW is covered. Grounding OPGW is covered in one paragraph on a page. And it specifically says any vertical run of OPGW, both runs will be grounded. So had I said something, we would have discussed it, pulled out the grounding manual to see how we properly ground that equipment, and seen that, we would have known what to do. So the next thing was unsafe habits. Obviously, the fall protection thing, right? That would have just increased my chances that day, right? Had I freaked out and just let go and fallen, I'd be dead. Had I been stuck there and not known how to get away from it, who's to say, you know, another cycle of that induction build up and down, that would have been what caused an issue with my heart or something to kill me. But had I been protected from a fall, all I would have had to do is let go and fall into my harness and been okay. Lack of understanding, spoke a little bit about that. You know, we thought we knew how to mitigate that hazard. We've grounded it before, and we thought we were good, but it wasn't safe. But I think the biggest one out of this was that my mindset that day, being the safety guy on the crew, you know, watching out for my brothers, and feeling invincible because I was the safety guy. That complacency caught up with me. And then number one was that I didn't speak up. Had I said something at that tailboard, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation, you know, or even worse, having a worse conversation if somebody got hurt or killed because I didn't speak up that day. And so that's the biggest thing I want to talk about today is speaking up. Too many people have died because there was something that was not shared or not spoken about, not brought up. And I think that one of the biggest things is that fear of being vulnerable, you know, and looking like a fool if you have to ask a question. Line work is dangerous work, guys. It's, you know, we hear it all the time. It's in the top 10 most dangerous jobs in the world. And so when you think about that, I don't think there's room for a stupid question. Like stupid questions, there's no such thing. And so that's the biggest thing that I say when I started leading crews and was a foreman. Any question goes, open it up, and that foreman sets the stage. Like, hey, anybody got any questions? There's no stupid questions. Speak up now, because if you have a question, let's talk about it and get it out right now. And as I thought about that and remember as an apprentice, I remember times where we were getting ready to go and do a big helicopter project. And I sat there, you know, as a first step apprentice in, you know, the group at the tailboard and had a question, but was just like, you know, hey, I don't want to look like an idiot, you know. And so I was that guy. And so what I would do is I'd go after the tailboard and go over to my lead lineman and you know, and say, hey, you know, I have this question. Can you answer this for me? Because I knew him and I trusted that he wouldn't call me out on my question and call me an idiot or whatever. But who's to say that somebody else in that circle wouldn't have the same question? Who's to say that my question wouldn't spark, you know, wouldn't bring up a hazard that was unidentified, you know? So when we think about speaking up, the purpose of speaking up is threefold. One, we speak up so we can clarify expectations for yourself, what you need to do that day, clarify expectations for the job that day. What's our plan? What we're going to do? What needs to happen so that we can get that job done successfully? And what is job success? Is job success getting the job done? You know, getting the wire back up and getting the houses heated up? Is job success getting the job done under budget? Is job success getting people home safely? And I would have to say it's all of the above. You know, we linemen are very proficient at being efficient and getting the job done, and we need to take all those variables into account. Do the job, get the job done efficiently, get the job done right, and do it safely so that everybody gets home at the end of the day. 2 is to comprehend. That comprehension, we speak up so that everybody understands what their task is that day, what the objective is, what we need to do to get from A to B safely, job complete. And then to collaborate so that we're all on the same page. You know, and as I think about a crew and a team working together to get from A to B, I'm reminded of railroad tracks. And as you look at these railroad tracks, you see 2 parallel tracks going from here to wherever, right? If those aren't in alignment, that train's not going to get to its destination. And the same thing goes for any crew working together. If we're not on the same page, if we're not in alignment on our goals for that day and how we're going to do it, we're not going to get to that end goal. And that end goal is everybody home in the same condition that they were when they went to work. You know, and so that all comes together at that tailboard brief in the morning before you go to work. At that tailboard brief, when you're together as a crew, halfway through the day, you take a lunch break and you pop together again just to realign so that we can get to the end goal that day. So without a detailed hazard assessment, you may as well be doing your job that day blindfolded. There's no way to see what's on that job site. And so one of the things that I see a lot, so in my position now, I do tailboard reviews all the time. So I'm constantly looking at our tailboards for crew tailboards. I'm constantly looking at and going and being part of a tailboard, and I'm watching crews work and following their tailboard to see, you know, are they following their plan or are they just going from A to B, however they go about it. And that tailboard is like an essential part of that day. And so when I think about that, and like I said earlier, that foreman sets the stage and the tone for that tailboard and makes it so that everybody feels comfortable and confident that they can open their mouth and voice their questions, their concerns, because if we don't have a good understanding of the work that we need to get done, of the hazards involved in it, we're setting ourselves up. There is enough danger in this trade and in the work that we do without the unknown. And so when I think about that, the foreman may be the leader of the crew, but you are the leader of your personal safety. And so, excuse me, I know for myself, I'm not gonna let somebody else tell me that I have to do it a certain way that's not safe. And when I think about that and me being a safety guy and the whole speak up culture, because that's what we need to embrace, that speak up culture. We need to open our mouths so that nobody else dies. I'm recalling certain occasions prior to my accident where I had one lineman that I worked with who was we'll say hard-headed. We'll just say hard-headed to the whole 100%. And I would catch, I would see him not using his buck squeeze, climbing the pole. He would free climb up, or he would just use his regular skid, climbing up the pole, and it's one of those things where it was like, come on, dude, like, you know what we're supposed to be doing. You know, and if you know, it came down to the point where I had to say, pull the foreman over and say, hey, if something happens to him, it's going to be on, you know, it's going to be on all of us. We're all going to have to live with this because we didn't speak up. And as I think about that, and after my accident, and thought about all that happened and why, you know, why I didn't speak up that day, and as I personally embrace the speak up culture, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't go without, I wouldn't not speak up when I saw somebody doing something wrong. You know, if I looked up, and prior to my current job, I watched contractors for the utility. So I would go out and I would see all the different contractors and the crews out doing work on the transmission. And so I got to see a lot of different companies and a lot of different crews working, and so, you know, calling out not enough rubber, you know, there's guys really encroaching on MAD and not being protected, you know, and having those, they're very hard conversations to have, because it takes a lot to convince somebody, or it takes a lot to say that's not the right way to do something, you know, or to tell somebody that they're doing something wrong. I don't know anybody that enjoys being told that they're doing something wrong, you know, but we need to be speaking up and sharing that with them. So as I think about the tailboard and that opportunity that everybody in that circle from the bottom to the top has a responsibility to speak up and say, you know, anything that's coming to their mind, any questions that they're having. There's a lot of variables that come into the work that we're doing. You know, if you're doing underground work, there's a lot that goes into that. Grounding, there's so many variables within grounding. Bare hand work, obviously, there's a lot going on there. You know, storm damage, even more, right? So there's so many unknowns out there. You know, you got widowmakers hanging in the trees, you know, down wire, poles that have been stressed due to trees going down or wind or whatever. It adds another variable on top of just the normal work that we do. But the biggest thing that I want to talk about right now within the tailboard is the emergency action plan. You know, and I talked about my plan that day. We had a plan, and yeah, I made it to the hospital, but probably that day a better idea would have been to throw me in that helicopter and fly me there, you know, the 20-minute flight versus driving an hour and a half to the hospital. I've unfortunately had the opportunity to investigate incidents, and one of them was a fatality. And I was the rep for the utility on this fatality investigation. So it was me, the president of the contractor that day, and 2 OSHA inspectors going out to the job site. And as I got word that this fatality happened, and I rushed out to the job site, and this job site was up in a canyon. There was no cell service up there. It was on 60 kV circuit. Most of that circuit is inaccessible. I've done a lot of work up in that area, so when I heard that, I knew that you know, there were, like I've said a lot, there are a lot of variables to the work that they were doing that day. The structure that they were working that day was accessible, so they didn't use a helicopter, but there was a helicopter on the job site working other sites. And unfortunately that day, the lineman that passed away decided to go out on a baker board with no fall protection to the pole. He and the other lineman out on that baker board, the baker board failed. Both linemen fell 60 feet, and unfortunately one of them passed away. But when it happened, the other lineman that fell was in good enough condition that he assisted with the rescue. They did their emergency action plan. They called out on the radio to get 911 coming. And what showed up that day to their job site was an EMS helicopter that didn't have hoisting capabilities. And so I'll draw this out really quick. kind of what this job site looked like. You got the highway down here, and then this hill, right? And so here's the highway, and where their job site was, there was a huge pullout. And the crews had their trucks parked in this pullout here, right here. And their job site was up here, and they were replacing poles. So they had a new line and buck transmission pole, no distribution underbuild. They had just set that pole, so there was a fresh pile of dirt that the second lineman actually landed in that soft dirt, and that's what saved him. The other lineman landed sideways with the diving board as part of his fall. But as I looked at their emergency action plan and the issues that they ran into that day, that helicopter came, couldn't hoist them, so they landed that helicopter here, right? Down here, shut it down, and there was an ambulance that showed up as well. And the only way to get to that job site that day was to climb hand over hand up this rope, which, I mean, I've done 100 times up that canyon. A lot of stuff is like that. You know, if you're not using a helicopter, you're climbing into that area. And it's unfortunate that day the EMS personnel that showed up that day were not in any condition to be able to climb. They were not physically fit enough to climb up to that location. So it took a long time for rescue to get up here. And the lineman didn't want to move him because, you know, he'd just fallen 60 feet. He was still alive. And my understanding is that he coded a few times. By the time EMS got up to him, we were able to stabilize him for transport and started moving him toward this cliff, which from the rope to the structure was probably 100 yards. They had to stop and resuscitate him a few times. He ended up passing away at the top of that rope. And this one really hit me because as I thought about it, how many times have I seen or even been part of tailboards where the emergency action plan was the same emergency action plan we had from the day before, from the week before, the month before, and not taking into account that job site there, the work that we were doing, the egress that we had. That one really hit me because essentially what we want to do when somebody gets hurt is we want to best their chances at making it out of that. And the only way to do that is to have a solid emergency action plan that's gonna work for that job site. You know, and had somebody actually said, hey, you know what? When we call for 911, listed on your emergency action plan, you know, hey, if somebody gets hurt at, you know, structure number 7, somebody gets hurt at that structure, when we call in structure number 7, let's make sure that we're calling and we're saying we need either hoist operations to be able to rescue him out of there, or it's going to be a hike and rescue. You know, that way when EMS shows up, they know, you know, search and rescue team is going to need to come up there with all of their climbing gear and somebody that's been climbing and knows how to hike and rig a litter to be able to get them down that hill. It's very unfortunate, this incident here, that employee, you know, who's to say he would have made it anyway, but like I said, we want to better the chances of him making it, right? And as I recall some of the things that I post this incident, I started looking into different ways that we can set us up for success. And so what I found in California was the California Highway Patrol has 8 helicopter headquarters across the state. And in our area, we have 2 that we run off of, up our north area and then one out of our central area. And so I reached out to them, and come to find out, you know, it's a state agency, so it's completely tax paid, and it's not something that, you know, anybody has to pay for. Not that that's a huge issue when you're trying to get somebody rescued. But they came out, sat down at our show up, and gave a class. They set up. They got their their EMS guy came off their paramedic came out of the helicopter, set up all his gear, and showed us what would happen if they showed up on the job site, how they would do a rescue. And I just asked him, hey, what's the best way to plan for success if we were to call you out? And he's get frequencies that on your radios that we can have communication with you when we get on site. So we set that up with our radios. The other thing was, give us a call ahead of time. If you're working in a certain area, we'll fly out there and meet with you guys. That way we can see where you guys are working. You guys can have an idea of what it's going to be like if we have to respond. And so I ended up having this actually happen. There's an area that we have, it's called Hellhole. It's about a 2-hour drive into this area. Once you get there, it's beautiful, but the drive is not pleasant. It's all dirt road, and in a big truck, it just takes forever. And we had a contractor working out there. I was still working for the utility at the time, and I get a call from the superintendent of this contractor who's visiting from out of state. So they're not familiar with the area and what goes on. And so essentially what happened that day was the crew was doing just a simple tag work, replacing insulators, or not insulators, but down guys. And so they weren't having to do any helicopter stuff, and it was all hike in. Basically, the powerhouse, I could just use this same picture here. Here's, you got the powerhouse down here at the bottom of the hill, and your tower line comes down the structure here. And what they were doing is they'd hike up here, and they were replacing and throwing fish rods and down guys and replacing down guys. And when I got the phone call, it was one of the linemen stepped on a rotten tree that had fallen over and was rotten. He stepped on it and it crumbled and he fell and broke his leg. And he was up here a ways. And the way that this circuit was, it was cut into the forest. So basically it was a swath and the circuit ran up it, and it was a 60 kV circuit with a 230 circuit right next to it, and both were hot. And what happened that day, they called EMS, and like I said, EMS, the drive-in was forever. So about an hour in, EMS shows up, and they get there, and they're looking at it, and they're like, well, how are we supposed to get up to him? So they're looking at it, and I get the call from the superintendent, and he says, hey, I got this guy. He's up on this steep incline. EMS is here, and they can't get to him. What do we do? And I said, I'm going to hang up with you. I'm going to give you this phone number. You call it. It's the CHP. Give them your coordinates, and they'll fly out there. And so I sent him that number, and I'd probably say 25 minutes later, he called me back and said, hey, thanks, the guy's on his way to the hospital. And so what happened was he called that CHP number, and the CHP crew, for that local CHP crew, was working with another crew, 2 helicopters. They were doing training over at a lake nearby. They shut their training down and brought both helicopters to the rescue site. And the cool thing was the helicopters, the CHP helicopters, they run GoPros all over their helicopter. So you got one on the belly, you got one on the hoist, you got one inside, so you can see everything. And so I was able to download the video and watch it. And what happened was the first helicopter flew in, dropped the paramedic down to the job site, stabilized the guy, put him in a splint on his leg, and then came back and hoisted him up, the lineman up, and then the second helicopter hoisted the paramedic out, and it was done. And it was really cool to hear that actually worked, and all of that we put together worked for him. And yes, it was a broken leg, but I mean, he didn't have to hike down, and he was 280 pounds. So who's going to carry the guy out, right? The other thing that we learned, I was excited to hear about this. I wanted to get a debrief from the pilots to learn, to see how it went. And so I went to that CHP office the next day and sat with the pilots, and that's when they showed me the GoPro, and they were excited to be able to share this. But the paramedic that went down, he had some concerns because he was wondering, is there any reason why he would be getting shocked while he was being lowered in there? And I said, it all depends, what are you guys using for a hoist line? And they were using a steel cable for a hoist line. And here you got this helicopter hovering above, who's already building up its own, static charge on a steel cable, lowering a guy into a 230 kV field. And so I said, there's definitely 230,000 reasons you'd be getting a little buzz in there. And he's like, I didn't like that. And I was like, that's kind of, we as linemen kind of get used to the little buzz we get when we touch a tower and we're working out there, but it was something that they weren't very comfortable with. And so we ended up bringing somebody from our helicopter operations in. I came in and we talked about induction and, how to mitigate it. And, we learned a lot about that. And so, it helped us plan for the future, our work with our rescuers. And so that's just something we share all the time on our tailboards, is our emergency action plan, how we're going to use the CHP, when we're going to use them. If we're working in a certain area, I'll call them ahead of time and say, hey, this is the area we're working in. If you guys are in that area, you want to stop by and say hi to the guys and just kind of see what we're working with, then, I think it's a great idea for you to come in. But that was the biggest thing I wanted to talk about on that tailboard part is, the emergency action plan is huge, guys. Set ourselves up for success when the unknown happens, with that, I want to say thank you for whoever is on today. You are showing your commitment to not only your safety, but the safety of those you work with. I'm fortunate and blessed to be here today to be able to share my story with you. And I pray that nobody else has to go through what I went through to be awakened, because we've seen it before, and unfortunately we'll probably see it again. The next guy that does what I did might end up in the ground, and it's an unfortunate thing. So what I'll leave you with is this. To make a commitment not only to yourself, but to your family, that you'll speak up no matter what. The work we do is dangerous enough as is, but we're not talking about what we're doing, and asking those questions. We're just creating an even bigger hazard. And I'll just add one more thing. Near hits and near misses and good catches are huge and need to be shared. So when something happens and you get away, you get away with it. Not to say we're trying to get away with anything, but something happens that you didn't intend to happen. Share those things with others. Post it on this site if you're a member of our ECOS. Share it there at the utility. Share it at wherever. Get it out there so that it doesn't happen to somebody else. It's so many. I'm on one investigation right now, whereas we looked through the corrective actions that we're planning for this. These corrective actions have already been put in place for incidents that have happened before, and they're still happening. And so if we don't speak up and share these things with other people, they're just going to continue to happen, and we're going to continue to have people die in our trade. And I know it's an unfortunate thing to say, but anybody that's been in this trade for 5+ years, and it's unfortunate, probably a lot of apprentices out there that know somebody who's lost someone. And it's no fun. It's no fun to be part of a funeral and put a brother in the dirt. And so I'll leave you guys with that. If anybody has any questions for me, I'll open up for questions. If you want to get in touch with me and give me feedback or just chat with me about what was said today or what we can do in the future, there's my email address.